Hello and welcome to Dessert and Dish. I'm your host this week, Brad Barnham, and this is my co-host, the Reverend Matt Gillard. We are delighted today to have a friend, a colleague, a wonderful man with us, the Reverend Dr. Dan Tatarnic, who is, of course, somebody we all know dear and are happy to have with us. Hi, Dan.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And Matt, nice to see you as well.
Thank you, Brad, and nice to see you tonight, Dan.
Yeah, you too, Matt.
We're happy to have a little conversation and just have dive in deep a little bit here and hear what your story is, where you've been, where you're going, what's going on in your life and in the greater life of the church. So
it's awesome. Thank you.
Would you like to start off by just maybe chatting a little bit with us about, where you started, what's your life, who are you?
Yeah. Well, where did I start? Matt,
I guess we should talk about the cake first. See, Martha's so graceful with this whole thing. She does it every week, and it's flawless and gorgeous, and here I am fumbling about. Let's stop and talk about our dessert this week.
Stop and reverse it. What do we have, Matt?
Tonight we have birthday cake.
Oh.
Our normal host, Martha, had her birthday yesterday, and we had birthday cake here today, and it is from Subs Plus.
So that's our dessert this week, and I think it's local.
I believe so.
Yeah, it's about 650 meters, according to Google, from where we live. So
there you have it.
That's pretty local.
That's pretty dang local.
That's right.
It's wonderful to celebrate Martha in this way while she's not with us, and let's go on with our conversation. So, talk about us.
Right. Okay. So beginnings. Where does my faith story, my vocational story begin? It's a very interesting question because it's actually about 35 meters outside this door. My life in faith really began at the Cathedral of St. Catherine of Alexandria, which is the Roman Catholic cathedral here in St. Catherine's. And my family has a long, long history with that particular parish, going back many, many generations. And we always worshiped there. And, as I began to get older, I'm talking about 14 or 15 years old, not necessarily as a youngster, I began to become more involved in parish life. It's where I had my first job, actually, as a sacristan, but also cutting grass and doing some work around the cathedral and the rectory. And one thing kind of leads to another, and began to work as a lay minister in youth and family ministries. And that is, I would say, the crucible. That is where I was introduced to the faith. The parish priests that I worked with over the years at the cathedral were really stellar priests. The liturgy and the preaching was wonderful and inspiring. And being so close to the center of all that life, it was a cathedral parish. So, the cardinal could be there, the bishop could be there. I just got a sense that the faith of the church was so much greater than just the parochial unit. It wasn't just the parish unit. It was the parish unit is connected to the Catholicos, the greater Catholic Church worldwide. And it was in that community that I began to learn about the faith and actually, to use a word, rehearse the faith.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's, because growing up, I think you stumble, you fall. There has to be room for error. Yeah. In the spiritual life, you have to leave room for error. People are going to try, they're going to stumble, they're going to fall, they're going to rise up. And I felt that community back in the 1990s, the early 1990s, was one that was very healthy for me.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned this term rehearse, and in a way that provokes a lot of interesting concepts to me. So I grew up in a very different church than you did.
Exactly.
I grew up in the United Church, and there's a for those who know much about that church, I'm sure you do. There's just a difference in practice, and for me, something that drew me to the Anglican Church was that focus and that attention to the detail of the tradition of the practice.
That's right.
And so the act of rehearsing the practice was not something that we did in the church that I grew up in. And so I was wondering, maybe was that something that drew you to church life? Was that attention to detail in the tradition?
Absolutely, because I was also involved in serving and master ceremonies and all sorts of things over there that were directly related to, and I wouldn't have been able to name it at the time, but rehearsing in the life of a priest. You know, like these were priests, you know, like the idea of the priesthood is that offering up of prayer and sacrifice and thanksgiving. So all of those years that I spent at the cathedral were very, very important and very formative for me. I didn't know it until, you know, I reflected on it more deeply about 10 years ago, but it was really a school. You know, like it was a school in holiness.
It was.
And, you know, those priests, you know, not only did we know one another in the church, but also around the dinner table. And they knew my family. And so there was this great supportive community. And it was probably out of that experience that I began to realize that perhaps I had a vocation in the church as well. Because, you know, there was always that more, right? Like it's not just that I want to know a little bit, I want to know more.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want to experience a little bit, I want to experience more. Matt, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I was going to say, so much of what you're talking about really resonates with my own experience growing up from the rehearsing the faith.
Right.
I mean, liturgy was something my brother and I got to participate in a lot.
Truly.
Especially at our church, and having a priest who loved to play around with different parts of liturgy and do lots of liturgical innovation.
Yeah.
The other thing that really resonated when you were talking about being in a cathedral parish and seeing how it was much more than the parochial unit. I really started to feel like the church was a much larger body when I started to participate in things like youth synod and going to synod itself and seeing the whole diocese gather. So those are some similar things that are resonating.
Interesting.
Also the dinner
connection.
table conversations.
Well, it's very similar. And, you know, like you, of course, and your brother were raised in a household where your father is a priest.
Yeah.
Right? And, of course, the Roman Catholic tradition, that's very, very different. But, you know, the sense in which, you know, eating together and being together, et cetera, and watching, you know, watching your role models and what they're doing. I was just so curious, you know, like, why are you doing this? Why? And they had all the time in the world for me. You know, so I think about, you know, we talk a lot about mission and being missional today in the church. Look, I mean, I'm going to hand it to those priests that were at the center of my formation. They probably have no idea how impactful those meals around the table were, how those car rides together were, how those visitations and, you know, coming to our house were, and how that really inspired me.
Well, it sounds as though you're speaking of a relationship that many people have built over their lives at different times. So what you're speaking of right now is the kind of relationship that I built at university.
Okay.
So I went to school, and let's be clear, I had some really fantastic spiritual leaders during my younger years. But that close-knit relationship where you find yourself perceiving and observing the way people function, the way they live, the people that inspired you or inspire you continuously, how they function, because you might glean something from that. You might earn something in your heart on how you function. And for me, that was at university. So it's as if you, by being in this tight-knit community just across the street, at such a, what age are you talking about, 11, 12, you said?
Well, I mean, I was offered the job when I was 14, but I had already been a member of the choir and an altar server years before then.
So you had this faculty of hosts, you know, encouraging you and leading you on into your ministry, and you know, I might change a few words, and I could say the same for me. You know, professors and musicians and artists, a faculty leading me into my ministry or whatever you want to call it. You know, what I mean specifically is in my musical career and in your story, your trajectory, which we're focused on here today. It's like you had those early on mentors that are so unbelievably important.
Well, you know, and it wasn't just necessarily being, you know, in a small faith community. You know, I did my bachelor's degree at Brock University in philosophy, and a very, very small faculty, a very small group of students. But I give them all the credit in the world. They didn't hold anything back from us. And one of the best experiences I had was studying philosophy in a smaller class where, you know, we would often go out for dinner with our professors. They knew us by name, they knew our history, we knew them, and they watched out for us. You know, I credit them also, you know, just that sense of community, the pedagogy that you get in community is extremely important.
And it sounds like that has been something that has just been part of both classical philosophy from the ancient Greeks that would gather with the symposiums to Christians who would also gather to talk about theology while sharing meals and breaking bread.
That's exactly
or
it.
the poets, or the musicians, or the artists. You know, these are the way that we as humans have gathered has been around a table. You know, look at us.
Yeah, exactly. Dessert and dish, right? For a very reason. And then this table and this table, and this table's connected to 1,000 other tables in Canada and 1 million other tables around the world. It's the prime symbol.
And so why is it that when we have these people in our lives that inspire us to such great heights, why does it feel so special? And I don't have the answer, but perhaps you have some insight on this. Why is it so special when they offer to sit with us and be humans with us, not professionals? You know, we have those academic experiences, but then when we have the opportunity, I had a mentor at university who Martha also knows, named Jennifer Moyer, and she was a professor who I owe just half of my career to. And you know, and part of that was the opportunity to be a human around that person, not a student. Why do we look for those opportunities, or what makes that so special?
Well, I mean, I think we look for those opportunities because it's what we earnestly desire.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not very different from our relationship with God. You know, like I believe that life on earth mirrors life in heaven. And so at the heart of the Christian mystery, God is for the Christian person, a triune God. You know, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit living in perfect unity and perfect community. So if we are made in the image and the likeness of God, would we not as human persons desire and aspire for life-changing relationships and intimate community? Absolutely. Why? Because it's written right into our spiritual DNA, you know?
And I guess what I see that it also kind of ties onto some of the Trinitarian theology is when you have mentors that are very talented in their field, but they also invite you into that human side, you've kind of got that connection with the divine that they have in their specialty.
That's right.
Mixed with the human. And then there's also the sharing and the communal that gets thrown into it. So when you have the mentors that bring you into the human side of things, it just seems to be part of that whole Trinitarian experience.
Well, it is. And, you know, we're entering into that time of year in the church where, you know, very soon we'll be celebrating Feast of All Saints and All Souls. And one of the things that I've come to realize in the past 25 years is that, you know, we also have this relationship with our ancestors. You know, you look around the church and you look around churches and mosaics and icons, they're filled with the saints, holy men and holy women. And we enter into this holy dialogue with our past too through the communion of saints. I mean, it's written in our creeds. You know, I believe in the communion of saints, you know, and again, it just continues to co-resonate with that Trinitarian theology that lies at the heart of our Catholicity, our Christianity. It's why we gather at a little table like this. It's why we gather at a big table like that. It's why every Catholic right church has a table. Right?
Or it's why we sit with those that we are inspired by, and we share a cup of coffee, or and it's in those moments that we perhaps learn the most vital elements. You know, when you see somebody who you are inspired by in life, outside of the classroom, outside of the parish, when you see them sitting down and communing with you, and you hear them speak to you candidly, there's something remarkable about it. I don't know. I've always valued those experiences, and you're talking like you did too. And that was at during your university years, and before that, and after that. And so, why don't we just talk a little bit about that? You know, your experience in academia and university, and what roles did school play in your life and in your trajectory as we continue?
Yeah, well, school is one of those things that it took me some time to get to a place where I really felt natural in school, and that's when I hit university. I really feel like I struggled through grade school and I struggled through high school, but then getting to the university suddenly was like, this is the answer to the question, that I've been asking for so many years. And I think a lot of that had to do with the sense of self-directed study, but also the seriousness with which my professors seemed to take me and my fellow colleagues and students. It's a very different type of a relationship, and it was more, it resonated more with my experience, being at the kitchen table, the rectory table, and maybe with you too. The sense in which if you grow up in that pedagogy, I call it the pedagogy of holiness, in fact, in my thesis, the pedagogy of holiness, which is based in that sort of Trinitarian dialogue. This is starting to sound very philosophical and complex, but certainly if you've been raised with that, close, intimate relationships, getting to know somebody, being able to say, hey, look, come here, here's a book you might enjoy. Instead of doing what's required of you in this course, think about some other things too, right?
Yes.
And it'll be like, I don't know, like somebody directing you and saying, hey, look, why don't you try this genre of music? Just go and play with it. And I think that the academia at its best, really is a place of play.
Yes.
Love that.
And there's also the term of godly play in
play.
church. And that, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but play can just be such a great way to rehearse and try out different ideas.
And
it's when you're playing with the ideas, it's okay for them to fail.
In
And
fact, they should.
in fact, they should. And that's a much more comfortable way to actually test out things and to experiment. And it can just enable much more generation of ideas rather than when it's forced or under pressure.
Well, I can testify and say that a student who goes to school and tries to get out of class first is not one who will gather all the important pieces of going to school. I found that, and when I've spoken in my own time during dissertation, other times, but when I went to university for music school, I got a degree in something, but that was just one part of me at school.
Okay.
I diversified. My father always says, you need to, in life, there's only one way, and that is to diversify. You have to explore and figure out. And to be in class was only one part of it. To find other opportunities, to find other ways. I would go and meet with professors, and I would receive readings. Like when somebody that you admire tells you to read something because they think you're going to like it, that means that they know you.
Yeah.
And that is what kind of what you're talking about. And
that's what a friend does.
That's what a friend does.
That's what, That's interesting, right? Yeah.
It's the same sort of, it's like, and it's all coming back to the table. It's all coming back to this theme that we are looking for common ground.
We are sharing things that feed us.
Yeah.
Both intellectually and spiritually, as well as physically.
So at university for you, you did your academic and theological play.
Exactly.
So what were you really studying? What was going on at school?
Okay, well, I always knew that I wanted to pursue theological study. I mean, my parents' chagrin, I had to make a decision. And actually, a priest said to me, look, if you want to study theology, you should first take philosophy, because that'll put you in good stead, okay? So I took my degree in philosophy, and then I went into my master's degree in theology. And that set me up for success, right? It was just like, it was the right answer to the question. And then I was ordained. And, when I was ordained, I began to realize that there was about 5 or 6 years in, I forget what it was now, but began to think there's something missing, right? Like, so much of ministry is often a lone ranger kind of approach, right? Or a lone wolf approach. Quite often you're isolated. Not every parish has the resources for multi-person staff. And I was in a rural parish and beginning to feel quite lonely. But it was also shortly after my father died in 2006. And I began to realize, I had always wanted to go on and do advanced degree studies. And I thought, it's a long shot, but I'm going to put an application in because I think this is something that, my dad would have wanted to do. My dad and I, we used to go walking in the evening, sometimes for an hour and a half. We would just talk and talk and talk, and he was really my interlocutor. Mom kind of kept the home and the hearth together, and Dad was the person that I would often talk to. When he died, I felt that. I really felt that loss of a paternal conversation. And so that's when I applied to the the Doctor of Ministry program at the University of Toronto. Was accepted and began my studies there. And one of the best pieces of advice that I got from an advisor, which kind of continues on to this theme of godly play, was one of my advisors said, you need to run through the libraries and just have fun. Okay, like just
nice.
Go through, play, have fun, and that's what I did. I literally ran through the theological and philosophical libraries and just had fun with it. And, that's, again, sort of the context in which, I think the church can learn a lot from that. In terms of biblical studies, in terms of Bible study, catechesis, programs that really build that sense of collegiality. We are in this together.
Yeah.
And another thing I'm catching on with some of this, and particular your attitude of approaching learning and academia from a point of fun and exploration, is accessibility. This is something that it wasn't, yes, university is something that is privileged. Yes, it can have that appearance of an ivory tower or things that are a whole lot of technical terms. But what I'm getting from you is you're describing an experience that has been very much opened to you by other people, and one that has been made accessible. And it also sounds like it's one you believe needs to be made accessible for others.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it's critical for the church right now. I sometimes worry that we're being tantalized by a sort of dumbing down of the content of our faith. We have to be missional, which means that we have to dumb everything down. And you know what? That's never been my experience. It has never been. When I was ordained, I was told, don't preach theology from the pulpit. Well, I threw that out as soon as I could. And I can tell you, some people are going to grumble and they're going to say, oh, you're talking over our heads. But you know what? There's a whole category of people out there who are saying, I've waited 35 years for somebody to open these possibilities up, right?
Yeah.
So I think that in fact it's one of the reasons that I reached a stage. Okay, I reached the stage in my doctoral research where I had to make a decision. Did I want to go into the PhD program and become a doctor of philosophy and theology and see myself as mostly an academic or trying to aspire to an academic position in a university? Or did I want to go a different route and take the Doctor of Ministry, which is a doctor in the church? And my thesis director kind of helped me pray through that. Ultimately, where do you want to be? Do you want to be in an academic environment, or do you want to be doing theology in the church, with the church, for the church? Well, based on my experience of theology around a dining room table, of course I wanted to be doing theology locally in the church, with the church, and for the church, which is with the common person.
Which makes sense.
Well, yeah, like what do you want to do, Brad? Do you want to study music only to perform, at a very small, or do you want to bring joy to the life of people through your vocation?
Well, it's an obvious, response, and it's in, there are these, excuse me, there are these connectors to. It's so funny. Everything you're talking about is so resonant in my own life and in your life, but particularly in my life versus yours, because we have different paths here, stories, but it's as if the forks in the road are all sort of unified. It's all we all have these, if I was to pursue another degree of education, it would be at the doctoral level, and if I was to pursue, it would be between a PhD in musical arts or a DMA, a doctorate of musical arts.
Yeah.
And that is exactly the same. That's a relationship. The PhD would be the PhD, and the DMA is the degree when you want to be performance-based, when you want to be community-based. When you want to, you still are earning those doctoral level academic pieces of knowledge and that degree. But it's all about what you want to do with it in the end. And for you, I mean, you're clearly a community-based person.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. I would never have thought to say that, but yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, I've known Dan and I know each other for years. We've worked together in the past, and just I've known Dan to be someone who draws people together, and in the hope for that greater sense of community, that greater table, And I think that people like you, people like me, people like you, we are all of the type where we would not feel like we are attaining our fullness if we were to be in one space doing one thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that academics do one thing. I have such a great admiration for so many beautifully brilliant academics, but it is a smaller road than it is to be in the church, to be in the performance hall, to be in right.
It's an environment that can breed isolation or put you in greater pockets of isolation than some of the community-based stuff that we do in the church. Yeah. And I mean, that is also one of the reasons I chose to come here, because I was spending too much time in my dark studio at night.
In the library or in the studio.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I think about, where I was 30 years ago. And I was talking about those, family of origin stories about, the cathedral, et cetera, et cetera. What became obvious to me through the years of being there was it was priesthood, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not that I wanted, I hardly call myself an academic. I mean, I'm a priest. Yeah. Right, like when I die, bury me a priest, please.
Right.
And I take that vocation seriously, because it's a life lived in community. Like I said earlier, the priesthood is about raising up the prayers of the people. And raising up the sacrificial offering of the church. And we know that, as it says in the Book of Common Prayer, and here we offer and present unto thee, O Lord, ourselves, our souls, and our bodies.
Yeah, it's everything.
Yeah, to be a reasonable, holy,
and living
sacrifice unto thee. I mean, that is essentially the nature of the priesthood, right? Like, my life is going to end at some point in time, but at the end of my life, I hope that I have sung a song of praise, of doxology, right? So I consider everything that I have done in life, the paths that I have taken, is based in that sense of faith. Like, yes, I'm a broken, busted up person, but I can still raise that as a living sacrifice.
And all the reason that you should.
Okay, good enough, right?
Right?
Yeah.
We're a group of broken, beautiful souls, and every teacher in my life, every inspiration or influence in my life has been broken, at least at one point, and that gives us means and authority to teach and to offer. I think. I mean that. What am I to say? But I'm here, so I'm saying what I think.
It's through the cracks of our brokenness that the light of God shines through.
Bing.
This guy's been reading Leonard Cohen.
Actually, no.
Well, no.
You should.
Martha will make sure from this point onward that you are reading Leonard Cohen.
The great Canadian poet. Now, so we're talking about this path. We're talking about these decisions, and it's led you to where you are, and it's ultimately as a greater church, we've been led to this day. What is the role of the church? What is your role? What is our role? Why don't you end off with some thoughts here?
Yeah, sure. I probably 2 years ago, I would have answered that question with a lot more robustness. The church right now, and all of us in the church, are living through unprecedented times.
Yeah.
Okay? Brad, you started here in a pandemic.
Certainly. Okay?
Matthew was ordained during a pandemic.
And graduated during
a pandemic. I don't know what the grand vision of the church is. I don't have to.
Yeah.
What fascinates me is, I think, you had briefly mentioned the work that we did together at Christ Church Cathedral in Hamilton. And I think it's interesting, and believe me, it's one of those, I say, miracles of grace. 5 years ago, I came into Christ Church Cathedral and took up my stall beside this young singer. Handsome young singer. And, I love being there and singing and being in that environment. And then in the work that we're doing with Michael Bloss. Then when the pandemic hit, what did we do?
We all just went like this because we had to protect. We were afraid, but we were also preparing for the worst.
We're preparing for the worst, and also, I think the past 2 years, I've seen more creativity and flourishing in the church than I have in years. You know, it's funny. I always say the church thrives in adverse circumstances.
Isn't that something to hold on to?
Right? And when you think about the sudden bursting forth of creativity, I mean, this, for crying out loud, this is a bursting forth of creativity that the pandemic has sort of prompted us or impelled us to embrace. And it's in this parish, it's in parishes and cathedrals all over the world. Just a sense in which the old order has passed away. Thanks be to God, alleluia. Now we'll figure out, boots on the ground, it's going to be a little bit dirty, it's going to be a little bit risky, it's going to require that godly play, but we're here.
Together.
We're here together.
We're sitting together. We're breaking bread together.
And communing with those online.
Communing with you online. And that is something to celebrate. And I think that there's been enough things to be stressed and worried about in this past 2 years. We need to spend a few moments every day appreciating the beauty that we have forged through these times. It would be easy to say that things could have fallen apart to an unfathomable degree if we didn't stand up together and create this beauty and this flourish of creativity that you mentioned.
Well, and it's not my church. It's Christ's church, right? The church belongs to Christ and the Holy Spirit and God the Father. I think of that, the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Okay, it's going to trip, it's going to stumble, my God, there's going to be scandal, etc., etc. But, it's Christ's church. So people, this is just a little joke, maybe I end on it, I don't know. But, people say to me, with everything that's going on in the church today, the scandals, the resources, pandemic, how do you sleep at night? And I jokingly say, well, maybe not so jokingly, I say, I have a little sip of bourbon, and I say, Lord, it's your church. If you want it to work, you're going to have to do something about it, but I'm going to bed.
And that's what you have to do. Something.
And what was it that Martha said the other week?
I don't know. What did Martha say?
I think she was quoting Archbishop Mark MacDonald with, if God doesn't show up, we are toast.
We're toast.
She said that in
her sermon. That's right. Yeah, but I mean, right now, I have to say, I can feel that more now, that sense of God's movement in the church, God's animation of the church, the Holy Spirit's inspiration. I feel more confident today than I did 10 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Isn't that brings hope into this place, but not just this place, into the greater church.
Absolutely.
And it's something that we all should celebrate.
Yeah.
Reverend Dr. Dan.
Hey.
Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for your hospitality. I appreciate it.
Matt, and I'm Brad. This has been our edition of The Guys, Dessert, and Dish. Thank you for being here with us. We'll see you again next week.
Thank you all.
Good night, everyone.
We good?
All right.
That was great.